today's webinar on the Paycheck Protection Program's forgiveness information. I am Brian Manning. I'm a financial advisor here in Nashville, and I am joined once again by our resident SBA expert, Lane Rhodes. Lane and I have spent a lot of time over the last few weeks working with many of you, as have other financial advisors and essentially every associate here at Pinnacle processing these PPP applications and loans. And so today we wanted to take a little bit of time and talk with you about what happens now that you've gotten your Paycheck Protection Program loan, or maybe you're in the process for the second round, to understand what does it look like to have that loan forgiven. Just a couple of information pieces about how we'll go through some housekeeping items today. I think we started most of these by letting you know that we're going to do our best with the technical aspect of this and the audio-visual piece, but there may be some glitches along the way, so we do ask for some patience and grace there. We have opened up the Q&A section, so if you've got a question, please feel free to submit that. We do have a lot of participants today, so I doubt we'll be able to get to every specific question, but know that what we'll be doing is grouping those questions together and trying to address those as we go through the program today. So please feel free to submit questions and we'll work on that. If you have questions that don't get answered today, please feel free to reach out to your local office and have a conversation with your local financial advisor. We'd love to talk through your situation specifically and try to offer whatever guidance we can. With that, I will bring Lane Rhodes in. Lane, it's nice to see you again. Nice to be back on these webinars with you. And I think the best place to start today is if you could just give us an update of the landscape. What's the current situation with the PPP and where do things sit now?
Hey, Brian, it's good to see you. Thanks for having me on again. I think everybody is aware that at 9:30 this morning, the new funds that were allocated for PPP went live. And one of the benefits for Pinnacle clients is there was some extra money that was approved, $60 billion extra in funding that was allowable for banks of a smaller size to be able to process these loans. And so the way they broke up that 60 billion was 30 billion is going to banks with 10 billion or less in assets, and then another 30 billion is reserved for banks with 50 billion or less in assets. And so Pinnacle falls into that. So we get some extra funds that the big banks out there won't get, so we can help hopefully help every business owner that's currently in the queue. But as you are probably well aware, Brian, our folks here are actively pushing these loans through. We have teams that are going to be working 24 hours around the clock to make sure that hopefully we can get every application that's currently in process with us through the system. But we do expect that these funds are going to go much faster than what we saw during the first round. And the main reason that is just because the SBA and the banks have worked out a lot of kinks with the system. So we're anticipating that the funds will be able to go faster because we've all done this before. So just be on the lookout that we're probably anticipating these funds will not make it through the end of the week.
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride. It's certainly the funds have gone quick and the applications continue to come in, and yeah, it's certainly been interesting. Well, I guess, Lane, we're here today to talk through forgiveness. Lots of people want to understand what it's going to take to have their loan forgiven. That's one of the unique features about this program is the early guidance suggested that as long as a business spent up to 75 or at least 75% of their funds on payroll, that the loan would be forgiven. So can you talk a little bit about what we know right now about what it takes for a business to have their loan forgiven?
Yeah, definitely. You know, one of the things we're definitely advising people is that we are still waiting on that final guidance from SBA as far as forgiveness will be concerned. We just got guidance on Friday of how to actually calculate payroll from SBA. So we went through a whole first round of funding before SBA even gave us their guidance on how to calculate payroll. So unfortunately, probably expect about the same thing from SBA on forgiveness. They're saying that it could be, mid to end of May before they have the SOP out to us on exactly how to process forgiveness. But some guidance that we can give to you guys is, document. So every dollar that you're spending from these PPP loans that you're getting, you need to keep a paper trail of it. So we do know that 75% needs to be spent on payroll cost. And in payroll cost, you can include your health insurance and contributions to 401ks and state taxes. So keep all your documents and records of that. Payroll costs should be easy to kind of keep up and track. Then you can use 25% of the loan proceeds on interest expense, utilities, leases. So I know a lot of questions have been asked of, what leases go into that. If I'm leasing a copier or if I'm leasing a building, obviously those can go in. Those are monthly expenses that your business currently has. The main guideline we've been given by SBA is those expenses needed to have been in place as of February 15th of this year. So if you signed a lease, late in March, you cannot include, is what they're saying, those expenses in the forgiveness. They want to see expenses that were in place as of February 15th, and that's the same for interest expense. So interest expense is going to be the interest on any loan that the business had, and they need to see that that loan was in place by February 15th or earlier in order for it to be eligible for the forgiveness component. So if your business just took out a new loan this month, it's not going to be able to be included in the forgiveness component. Now, that's not to say you can't still use some of these funds on those expenses, but what you need to understand is that they're a loan at this point that you're going to have to pay back. And it's a very low interest rate loan of 1%, probably the best deal that you're going to get. But we do need to make it clear that there will more than likely be some component of the loan that business owners need to consider a true loan that may or may not be forgiven.
I think that's very helpful. I know, Lane, just recently in the last week, we've received additional guidance that talked about a demonstration of need for the loan proceeds. And that's gotten some people a little bit concerned and questioning what will they have to demonstrate. Can you give us any guidance on what you would have people putting together to be prepared to demonstrate their need for the loan proceeds?
That is a great point, Brian. So I know this has been a sticking point in the media lately. I think this program has done wonders for small business owners, but I think there was some confusion on the front end of who this money was really targeted to help. And it was really targeted to help small business owners that for one reason or another, they had some uncertainty in their business's cash flow and operations, so that they needed some assistance to make sure they could continue paying employees and paying their operating expenses. We as the bank are not going to say one way or another that your business did or didn't have a need for this money. So only you guys as the business owners really know if your company truly had a need for the money. But if you think there's going to be any question of that, what we would tell you guys is you probably need to put together some documentation around why you feel your company had a need for the business. So a record of how your vendors maybe aren't paying you timely, a list of your AR and maybe how it compared to this time last year, that obviously, those numbers have dropped. Bank statements keeping up with the fact that, normally at this point in the year, you're sitting on cash reserves of several $100,000, and right now you're only at 50,000. So just keeping up with documentation to prove to us, or not really us, to prove to SBA if there was any question as to whether your business really needed the money or not.
I think that's helpful. I think also, too, Lane, maybe if you could just spend a minute talking about the role that everybody is playing in this process. What is the business owner's responsibility? What's the bank's responsibility? And where should they look for guidance and assistance as they kind of walk through, now that they've received their funds, working through paying those funds out, and also in documentation and providing supporting documentation for forgiveness?
Yeah, that is a great question. We still have some question marks out there as to exactly what our role is versus SBA's role. But one thing that we do know, that application that was done on the front end that SBA put together, that every business owner filled out, and they had several things that you initialed and you attested to. The SBA is shifting the liability over to the business owners to, one, prove that they were eligible for this PPP program that was rolled out, and to prove that their business had a need for it. So that responsibility is laying on the business owner's shoulders. And if you guys have any questions of that, you really need to consult your attorney and your CPA to make sure that you fit into those guidelines. And then where the bank is going to come in is, we basically just validated that your payroll expenses were what you said they were, and that's what qualified you for the loan amount that you received, which was 2.5 times your monthly payroll. And then as we see the bank's role on the back end, we are going to come to you guys at the end of the 8-week time period to begin collecting the documentation of how you spent the money, so that we can go apply to SBA for the forgiveness on your behalf. And so the SBA, ultimately, they're going to make the call on the forgiveness, but the banks are going to obviously still be there to be the ones collecting the documents, making sure the documents meet the SBA guidelines whenever those guidelines come out on exactly what we're going to need to collect for forgiveness. But it'll, we'll have very specific rules that are rolled out to us from SBA as to how the client is able to get that forgiveness component. So the SBA will make the final call on that, but the bank's going to work as the conduit of how to get that information over to SBA. And they may, and I don't know this for certain, but what we're thinking is, just because there's going to be so many of these coming through at one time, they're probably going to give the banks the ability to make that determination on forgiveness based off the guidelines that SBA lays out. So I'm not sure if the SBA will really truly be reviewing those documents themselves, or just Pinnacle will be reviewing them on behalf of SBA. That's kind of yet to be determined. But once we get that guideline, we will definitely roll that out. But it really is going to be, the business owner's responsibility to be collecting those documents and then to provide those to us in a timely fashion, so that we can review them to apply for that forgiveness with SBA. And once we apply for that forgiveness, then the SBA is going to have some sort of window of when they actually give the bank that money, so that the loan is truly being forgiven. And what the business owners do need to realize is, during this time, that loan is accruing interest the whole time. So that's yet to be determined, of exactly how much interest, if any of the interest, will be forgivable by SBA. So the business owners need to be aware that after the loan is forgiven, there may be some component of it that's still a loan that needs to be paid off, based off of the timing of when the funds are actually received from SBA for that forgiveness component.
Yeah, and we'll give this website again at the end of the webinar, but it would be great to write this website down. Lane and her team have done a great job of already putting some information together for you if you've already received PPP funds, or you're in queue right now for the second round of funding, to be able to know. So if you'll go to pnfp.com/PPP Forgiveness. That's pnfp.com/PPP Forgiveness. We've got a calculator out there. We've got some of the information that you'll need, and we'll continue to update that as we continue to get guidance. So that's a helpful site to go to be able to continue to put together your information and be sure that your house is in order and ready for forgiveness. Lane, a lot of the questions that we have coming through are regarding timing. And there's a lot of question about, when does the clock start ticking? When does that 8-week clock start ticking? And so that's the first part of the question. But I think the second part that I would ask you to address also is, based on what I've read and understand, what the SBA is looking for on the forgiveness aspect is going to be sort of a cash basis, that it's specific to that 8-week window of time, and that it has nothing to do with anything that was leading into that 8-week window, or, for example, payroll that would be paid out on the backside of that 8-week window. It has to occur within that 8 weeks. Could you give us some guidance around that?
Yeah, no, that is correct as far as what we understand as of today from SBA. So if you're a company that, operates on an accrual-based accounting system, SBA is really using cash-based accounting methods for how this program is going to operate. So we did put together just a very basic spreadsheet out there that breaks the eligible cost for that we see as of today that the SBA has given us, the eligible expenses that can be forgiven. We've broken that down over the 8-week time period for you guys to be able to fill in and kind of keep track of. But that 8-week window does start on the day that we put the money into your bank account from the loan. And we did give 100% of those loan proceeds all up front, but they are to be used over the 8-week time period starting from the date that that money went in. And that will be the look back period that SBA will be looking for in order to show that it is forgiven. So I have had several businesses such as lots of restaurant owners saying, well, why would I go back and hire people, today when we don't know if we're going to be open for several more weeks, and wanting to wait, say, 6 weeks to use the money, and what they're going to run the risk of if they do that. It's not that they can't do that with the money, but then if they only use it starting in week 6 for payroll expenses, just those last 2 weeks of their 8-week time period are going to be eligible for forgiveness at that point. So they are wanting to see a head count, an employee head count number in addition to your payroll that you're actually spending. So I'm also getting that question a lot of, well, I can figure out a way to pay and still use 100% of the money that we got from the PPP loan, but I've only hired back, say, 25% of my workforce. And unfortunately, that wouldn't all still be eligible forgiveness, even if you used it all on payroll, because the average payroll was based off of a much higher head count than what you currently hired back. So you need to be cautious of that as well. Based off of how many employees you had at the time that you applied, based off your average payroll costs versus what the average number of employees are during your 8-week time period.
Yeah, I think that's great guidance. I think I've heard a lot of the same thing that, well, we've had to let some people go, but we feel like we'll be able to use the funds for payroll. We'll raise the pay of some of our people or make additional contributions or do some different things. But I think it's really important to remember and note that it's both payroll and headcount. It's how much you're paying, and it's also the number of employees matters as well. And then I guess, Lane, just to reiterate a little bit of what you said, but in terms of bringing back employees, because we've had clients, there are businesses out there that had to go ahead and let some people go. As far as bringing them back in, is there a specific time that they have to have had them brought back in, or is it just any time in that 8-week window?
Yeah, you can bring them back anytime in that 8-week window. But, a good equation to kind of think of is what was your average number of full-time employees during the 8-week window prior to you applying for the loan? And what your payroll costs were during that time, then divided by what your average number of employees were during, during your new 8-week window. So just kind of keeping track of that, because we're going to be comparing those look backs. So if you don't hire, some people for a few weeks into that 8-week time period, obviously when we divide it out over the full 8 weeks, it's going to be a different ratio than what we were looking at 8 weeks prior to when you had applied for the loan, with what the full-time head count was before that February 15th date. And
Sure. Go ahead.
I wanted to give out there, just based off the math that we've done, is because there's a cap of 100,000, so no one employee should be getting more than $15,385 a week in payroll. So if you're paying somebody more than that each week, that amount over that 15,000 wouldn't be forgivable at that point.
I think that's helpful. I know a lot A lot of businesses are, I know here in Nashville and really across the entire country, they're faced with safer at home restrictions and mandates and guidelines, and different counties and cities and states are taking their own approaches to when they're phasing people back into the workplace. So a lot of people are saying, I've gotten this money, but I can't bring my people back, or I can't open my business. Is the best, safest thing to just go ahead and continue to pay your people, even though they're really not able to come in and work in the workplace?
Brian, that's really going to be for each business owner to kind of determine what's best for their business model. But that was the intent of Congress when they wrote this program, was to keep employees paid. So that is kind of, the guideline that we're giving to people. We totally understand if it doesn't make sense for your business model to go and hire back 100% of their employees right now. But the intent of the program was specifically designed to keep employees paid. So that was, what the Congress was hoping that the business owners would use the money for.
That's perfect. And I know we're getting a lot of questions about what specific payroll expenses are included in that number. And I think it's just like on the front end through the application process, and you can correct me here, Lane, but it's gross pay, it's insurance benefits if you were paying insurance benefits, it's retirement benefits if you were paying retirement benefits. It's essentially anything that goes into what you were currently paying your employees. Is that correct for the forgiveness aspect of it as well?
That is correct. So yes, for payroll expenses, you can include, health, dental, any of those benefits that you had on February 15th of this year. If you had them on February 15th, then you can include them in for payment. Then we also can include retirement contributions. And so all of those, so the health insurance and the retirement contributions are on top of what you can pay people for their pure salary. So that 15,300 number is just based off of salary alone. That's kind of the cap for those people that, were making 100,000 or more. So that's good to know that, that's just the cash benefit to them is the payroll expense. And then you can add insurance and retirement benefits on top of it. And then the company can also pay, those interest expenses, utilities. There has been a lot of debate of exactly what goes into utilities. We're not going to get into the specifics of determining that yet. We'll let SBA make that call. But, as it stands right now today, utilities would be true utility bills such as, electric, gas, water. We're assuming cable and internet and that sort of thing can be included in there, but we don't have guidelines yet from SBA on exactly what all falls under utilities.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Lane, from your experience, and I guess this is probably a bit unknown from an experience standpoint because to get a forgivable loan is almost unheard of. But from a timeline, what should the expectation be once the 8-week period ends and they begin the process of the forgiveness for their loan? What should people expect for the timeline to understand if their loan is completely forgiven?
Well, so, it's going to take a lot more manpower to probably verify those documents for forgiveness than it did on the front end for us to verify just the straight payroll number. So we would ask that you give the bank a couple of weeks to be able to review these. And then once we review them and send them to the SBA to be eligible for forgiveness, there's going to be a window of time that the SBA then has to get back to the bank with the funds to actually pay off the loan and make it forgivable. So, right now in the guidance, SBA has up to 6 months to send those funds to the bank. So that is a long window of time. We're hoping that it goes quicker than that. But it is a 24-month loan. So it doesn't have to be paid in full to the end of that 24 months. And there will be 6 months on the front end of full deferment of principal and interest payments. But what business business owners do need to realize is that at the end of that 6 months, they will need to start making monthly payments on it, even if we haven't gotten the funds back from SBA yet and made that determination on the forgiveness component. And depending on how long that takes with SBA, that could take quite a while to get processed. I mean, I know on the first round, we heard some crazy numbers that the SBA did more, volume in 14 days than they've done in the last 14 years. So to be able to expect them to process that many payments to banks for the forgivable loans out there, it's going to be uncharted waters for them to even be able to start processing that money.
Yeah, I think that's good to keep in mind and just to keep in perspective. So I think one of the other aspects of this that is, again, a little bit unique for SBA lending is there's no prepayment penalty for this loan. So if a business owner has taken the PPP funds and then realizes that they can't spend all of that money on payroll or can't spend at least 75% of the money on payroll, they can hang on to that money and turn around and pay the money back. And there's no prepayment penalty for doing that. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, feel free. We've already had a couple of businesses that have taken the money and realized that, they're not going to need it for one reason or another, or maybe they feel like they don't fall in the guidelines any longer. And they've decided to go ahead and pay those loans off and close them off. And we're more than happy to do so. We can even do some modifications as of right now that we would be able to go put those funds back into the pool of PPP dollars so that another business owner could potentially use them if you feel for one reason or another that your business did not need them. And so that's something nice to know about right now as well, because I think there are thousands of business owners that we've heard from that didn't get the money the first round that truly do need it to make sure their business stays sustainable. And that's really why Congress put this program into place.
Yeah, Darlene has actually asked a great question that I know we were getting a lot on the front end, and I think it'd be great to readdress. If you've got employees that for one reason or another, you've made an attempt to rehire and either they found other work or you can't connect with them, you can't reach out to those specific people, is it okay to hire someone in their place? Does it have to be the exact same people to support the headcount number, or as long as you meet the headcount number, is that really what matters?
That is correct. It's just the head count number, Brian. So if you have employees that for one reason or another, are not able to come back or don't want to come back to work, we're seeing a lot of that right now. You can go hire somebody else. So it's just a true head count number. We're not going to be saying, well, you needed to have Bob Smith back on your payroll because you had that individual on your payroll as of February 15th. So it's just strictly a head count average.
Yeah, that's helpful. So I think, again, for what we know right now, the things to keep in mind is you have to have your head count number look the same. We need to make sure that you're paying them close to what you were paying them previously. And again, also make sure that you're not paying anyone a pay over that 8-week period that would equivalent to $100,000 or more for the year, because that wouldn't be forgivable on the backside of it. Lane, what else would you offer our participants today as guidance as we're going to continue to look at the forgiveness of these loans?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of questions around. So say somebody is not able to use 75% of the loan on payroll. As we read it and interpret it today, the SBA would still offer partial forgiveness. So say you use 50% of the loan on eligible payroll expenses, that 50% would still be eligible for forgiveness. That's how I'm interpreting it as of today. Now, SBA could come back and say something completely different to us on the back end, but as we view it right now, I still think that, even if you weren't able to use 75% and say you use 50%, that 50% would be forgivable. But you would need to know that the remaining 50% is truly a loan that would not be forgiven and would have to be paid back starting after that 6-month deferment window. So you have essentially an 18-month loan to repay back at that point.
that's helpful. And I know we've got a lot of self-employed individuals who have received funds or who have applied for the second round of funding. And would you give any specific guidance to self-employed sole proprietors, maybe where they're the only individual in a business, on how they should pay them? Is there anything they should do any differently with how they pay themselves during this period?
They just need to make sure that they are paying themselves weekly. When I know most business owners, if you're self-employed, you probably just take draws as you need it. So with this loan, with it being something that they want to see paid out over an 8-week time period, you need to make sure that you're taking a draw at the end of each week so that it can count into that forgiveness and not just taking one large draw at the end. We still don't really have final guidance on that from SBA, but I think that would be a safe way to do it to make sure that it still is eligible for that forgiveness and you don't fall into a trap of SBA saying that you didn't hire back even though you're the sole employee. If it looks like you waited till the last week of the 8-week period to start paying yourself, they're going to view that like you didn't hire back yourself until that last week. So I would just tell people to take draws on a weekly basis, which I know is probably very unusual for business owners that don't pay themselves out weekly. Another thing that is good to note is, everything is kind of the start date of everything is as of February 15th. So if you have any question as to whether your expenses are going to be forgivable, you really need to go do a look back as to what those expenses were as of February 15th. And that will tell you kind of the metrics there to use as to what will be eligible for forgiveness.
I think that's helpful. And again, we would remind everyone to go to pnfp.com/PPP Forgiveness. And we've got some great tools that Lane and her team have put out there. There's an expense tracking tool that can help you keep up with your expenses through the forgiveness period so that you make sure and document it. But I think, Lane, as has been the case all along, what my biggest takeaway here for everyone listening is to just make sure you're documenting. Make sure that you're keeping up with all of your records. Keep good orderly accounts. Make sure that your bank statements are available. I think on the backside, when we get to 941s, it'll be a lot of the same documentation that we did for the application process. So be sure you're doing great record keeping and continue to check that website, pnfp.com/PPP Forgiveness. And we'll be sure to update that as we get further guidance from the SBA on what is and what isn't permissible for forgiveness. Lane, anything else before we wrap up today?
Just encouraging people to document. SBA is not a friend to the forest industry out there. They always want paperwork. So keep a paper trail of everything. So payroll, paper documents, utility bills, keep a copy of the utility bill. And then to take that another step further, we're going to want to see proof of where you paid it. So whether that was a check or giving us bank statements to show that they drafted the money from your bank statement on this day to cover that bill, we're going to want to see lots of that paperwork. So if you guys can start keeping a file of those records and then document them in some sort of spreadsheet, you don't have to use our spreadsheet that we provided, but the easier you have that information laid out for us when we get it to go for the forgiveness component, it basically dummy proof it for us, because the longer that we have to dig into the weeds to figure out whether we think you spent it properly or not, probably is going to lead to a higher likelihood that some of it will not be eligible for forgiveness, because we can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you use the funds appropriately. So as much documentation as you can give us is always going to be a safer way to go on this one. So keep really good financial records between now and the end of June so that you can come back to us with that paperwork for the forgiveness component.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's important that we reiterate that as far as we know right now, that we're dealing on a cash basis. And so you want to make sure that it's for payroll and other expenses that qualify during that 8-week period. So if your payroll processes on a different timetable, you may want to make an adjustment during this 8-week period to make sure that you utilize up to at least 75% of the funds for payroll expenses and then other qualifying expenses along the way. And it may mean that we all have to make some adjustments during that period, but the biggest thing is to make sure that you've done what you needed to qualify for the forgiveness. And so that may mean making some adjustments in how you do payroll and other processes, but the biggest thing is to make sure that you do what's necessary there. I know one thing we've advised clients to do is to open a separate bank account. Many people do great record keeping, and they have their payroll drafted out of a specific account, and so that requires a lot of moving things around and that type of thing. But you can always set up one bank account and just sweep funds over from one account to the other as your payroll comes due, and as you're making the record keeping a lot simpler that way. Lane, it looks like we've gone through our questions for the most part that we tried to group together. We're thankful for your time, and I guess what I would advise clients and everybody that's participating to know that we'll continue to do these as we did on the front end. As further guidance comes out, as we get more information, we'll join back in and provide you the information that we have. Also encourage you to go to pnfp.com/PPP Forgiveness. All of the latest tools and information that we have will make available to you so that you can continue to work through that. We know it's a challenging time. We know there's lots of questions that are circling, and we're doing our best to decipher the information and pass it along to you. So we're thankful that you joined us today, and look for more of these webinars as we continue to learn more information. Thanks for your time, Lane.